The fluorescent lights of Riverside Arts Academy's main auditorium hummed softly as Darius Williams settled onto the worn piano bench. His calloused fingers' hands that had spent years pushing mops and scrubbing floors in this very building hovered over the ivory keys. The room held its breath. 15 judges sat in formation, their clipboards poised, their eyes filled with skepticism that they didn't bother to hide. But something was wrong. The moment Darius's fingers touched the keys for his warm-up scales, he knew. The C-sharp was flat, the F natural sharp. The A had been nudged just enough off-center that most people wouldn't notice. Most people. But Darius wasn't most people. His eyes flicked briefly to Professor Harrison Whitmore, the distinguished head of the piano department, whose silver hair and tailored suit commanded respect in every corner of the classical music world. The professor's face remained impassive, but there was something in his eyes, a challenge, an expectation of failure. Darius's heart hammered against his ribs. He could stop. He could call out the sabotage. He could demand a fair instrument. But then he'd be the janitor making excuses, the unqualified applicant who couldn't handle pressure, the man who didn't belong here anyway. So instead, Darius did something that would not only change his life, but would expose a truth about talent, prejudice, and the price of assumptions that would shake this institution to its very foundation. He began to play. But to understand what happened in that auditorium, to comprehend the magnitude of what Darius Williams accomplished that day, we need to go back. Back to where it all began, in the shadows of this very academy where a hidden prodigy had been practicing in secret for 7 long years. The basement of Riverside Arts Academy never made it into the glossy brochures. Down 3 flights of concrete stairs past the boiler room and storage areas filled with broken music stands and outdated textbooks, there was a room that most students didn't know existed. It housed an old Steinway grand piano, its black lacquer dulled by decades of neglect, its bench cushion worn thin by countless unnamed pianists from the Academy's early days. This was Darius Williams's sanctuary. Every night, after the last student departed and the faculty offices went dark, after he'd mopped every floor and emptied every trash can, Darius would make his way to that forgotten room. He'd crack his knuckles, a habit from his childhood, and lose himself in the music that lived inside him, music that had nowhere else to go. Darius was 32 years old, though the physical demands of janitorial work and the weight of deferred dreams made him look older. He'd worked at Riverside Arts Academy for 7 years, ever since the furniture factory in his hometown of Millbrook shut down, taking his father's job and their family's stability with it. The move to the city had been necessary but painful. His mother had cleaned houses. His younger sister had dropped out of college, and Darius had taken whatever work he could find. The job posting had seemed almost cruel in its irony, janitor, at one of the nation's most prestigious performing arts academies, where tuition for a single year cost more than his family had earned in 5. But Darius had needed the work, and the academy had needed someone willing to work nights for modest pay. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Darius Williams had been playing piano since he was 6 years old. It had started in the rec center in Millbrook, where an old upright piano sat in the corner of the community room. While other kids played basketball or watched TV, young Darius had been drawn to that instrument like a moth to flame. He'd taught himself by ear, pecking out melodies from songs he'd heard on the radio, teaching his small fingers to stretch across octaves that seemed impossibly wide. Mrs. Patricia Brennan, the rec center director, had noticed. She'd been a piano teacher in her younger years before arthritis had gnarled her hands and ended her performing career. She'd seen something in Darius, a gift that transcended formal training, a natural musicality that couldn't be taught. For 3 years, using her own money and donated books, she'd given him lessons. Real lessons. Theory, technique, the foundations of classical music. But then she'd passed away just before Darius's 10th birthday. The rec center had closed a year later, a victim of budget cuts. The old piano had been sold at auction, and Darius's musical education had ended as abruptly as it had begun. He'd kept playing when he could on keyboards at the public library on a broken electric piano a neighbor was throwing out, which he'd painstakingly repaired. But life had gotten in the way. High school meant work to help his family. After graduation, there'd been the factory job, long hours for wages that barely covered rent. Music had become a memory, a beautiful dream from another lifetime, until he'd taken the job at Riverside Arts Academy. That first night when he'd discovered the abandoned piano in the basement, Darius had sat down and played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major from memory. His fingers had been rusty, his technique imperfect from years of neglect. But the music had poured out of him like water from a broken dam. He'd wept while playing Mourning the Lost Years and celebrating the rediscovery all at once. From that night forward, Darius had practiced every evening he worked. He'd scoured the Academy's music library, sneaking theory books and sheet music back to the basement. He'd listened to the student recitals from outside the concert hall, absorbing technique and interpretation. He'd taught himself pieces by Rachmaninoff, Debussy, Liszt composers he'd only dreamed of playing as a child. The students who passed him in the hallways never gave him a second glance. The custodian in the gray uniform pushing his cart of cleaning supplies was invisible. The faculty barely acknowledged him beyond a polite nod. He existed in the margins of their world, necessary but unnoticed. Only one person at the academy knew about Darius's secret. Eleanor Hayes was 73 years old and had been teaching music theory at Riverside for 42 years. She arrived early every morning, often before 6, to prepare for her classes. And one morning, about 2 years into Darius's employment, she'd heard music drifting up from the basement. Beautiful, technically complex music that had no business being played at that hour. She'd followed the sound and found Darius completely absorbed in Beethoven's Sonata Pathétique. His eyes closed, his body swaying with the emotion of the piece. She'd stood in the doorway for 10 full minutes, listening with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. When Darius had finally finished and opened his eyes, his face had gone pale with fear. He'd stammered an apology, expecting to be fired. Instead, Eleanor had walked into the room, sat down beside him on the bench, and asked him to play it again. From that day, Eleanor Hayes had become Darius's guardian angel. She'd brought him advanced sheet music smuggled from her personal collection. She'd left books on music history in the basement with passages marked that she thought he should study. She'd never asked him to play for anyone else, respecting his privacy, understanding perhaps better than anyone the complicated shame and fear that came with being talented in a world that had given you no avenue to showcase that talent. "You have a gift, Darius," she'd told him once, her voice firm with conviction. "A true gift. Don't let this place make you believe otherwise." But gifts meant nothing without opportunity, and opportunities for janitors were few and far between at institutions like Riverside Arts Academy, until the spring of 2024, when everything changed. The flyer appeared on every bulletin board in the academy on a Monday morning in early April. Bold letters announced the Summer Intensive Piano Program, a prestigious 8-week course that had launched the careers of numerous concert pianists over the past 3 decades. It was taught by the Academy's most distinguished faculty, attended by the most promising young talents, and came with connections to managers recording studios and performance venues across the country. But what caught Darius's attention wasn't the program itself. It was the scholarship announcement at the bottom of the page. For the first time in the program's history, Riverside Arts Academy is offering one full scholarship to the summer intensive piano program, including tuition room and board, and stipend for living expenses. This opportunity is open to applicants of all backgrounds who can demonstrate exceptional musical ability. No formal training required. Auditions will be held May 15th. Darius read the flyer 3 times, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. No formal training required. Open to all backgrounds. For the first time in the program's history. He'd pulled the flyer down from the board, folding it carefully and tucking it into his uniform pocket. For the rest of that day, as he'd gone about his duties, his mind had raced with possibilities and fears in equal measure. Could he actually do this? Apply for a program alongside students who'd been training at places like Juilliard and Curtis walk into an audition room as the janitor and ask to be taken seriously as a musician? The voice of doubt was loud. He was 32 years old. He'd never attended a single formal piano lesson beyond what Mrs. Brennan had given him as a child. He had no credentials, no pedigree, no letters of recommendation from renowned teachers. He had no recordings, no competition wins, no proof of his abilities beyond the music he played alone in a basement that nobody visited. But there was another voice, too quieter but more persistent. Mrs. Brennan's voice, from years ago. "You have something special, Darius. Don't ever forget that." Eleanor Hayes's voice, more recent. "You have a gift, a true gift." That evening, before he started his shift, Darius knocked on Eleanor Hayes's office door. She'd looked up from her grading, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Darius, come in, come in." He'd stood awkwardly in her doorway, the flyer clutched in his hand. "I need to ask you something." Eleanor had set down her pen, giving him her complete attention. "Of course. Do you think—" He'd paused, the words catching in his throat. "Do you think I'm good enough for this?" He'd held up the flyer. Eleanor Hayes had stood up from her desk, walked over to him, and taken both of his hands in hers. She'd looked him straight in the eye, her gaze intense and unwavering. "Darius Williams, you are one of the most naturally gifted pianists I have encountered in 4 decades of teaching. Yes, you should audition. And more than that, you deserve to be in that program. But I don't have any formal training. No degree. No, you have something better than training," Eleanor had interrupted. "You have authentic musicality. You have passion. You have thousands of hours of dedicated practice. And you have the kind of talent that no amount of money or privilege can buy." She'd squeezed his hands. "Apply for that scholarship, Darius. Let the world hear what I've been privileged to hear for 2 years." So he'd done it. He'd filled out the application, his hands shaking as he'd written his employment history, left the education section mostly blank, and attached a simple statement. "I am a self-taught pianist, seeking the opportunity to develop my skills and share my love of music with others." 2 weeks later, he'd received the letter confirming his audition slot, May 15th, 6:30 p.m., main auditorium. The audition was 2 days away now. Darius had practiced every night until his fingers ached, working through the 3 pieces he'd chosen. Bach's Prelude and Fugue in C minor, from the well-tempered Clavier Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, and his own personal favorite, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. Pieces that showcased technique, emotion, and the full range of his abilities. Eleanor had helped him select them, had listened to his practice sessions in the basement, had offered gentle suggestions about interpretation and dynamics. She'd even bought him a new shirt and slacks for the audition, waving away his protests about money. "Consider it an investment," she'd said with a smile. "I want a front row seat at Carnegie Hall someday." But despite Eleanor's faith and his own preparation, Darius couldn't shake the anxiety that gripped him every time he thought about walking into that auditorium. Because he knew he wouldn't just be auditioning as a pianist, he'd be auditioning as the janitor, as the man with no pedigree, as someone who didn't fit the mold of what a Riverside Arts Academy scholarship recipient looked like. And there was one person in particular whose judgment he feared most. Professor Harrison Whitmore was a legend in classical music circles, a concert pianist who'd performed in the world's most prestigious venues. Before transitioning to teaching, he'd led Riverside's piano department for 15 years. His students had won international competitions. His name on a letter of recommendation could open any door in the music world. His approval was the golden ticket every aspiring pianist dreamed of receiving. He was also the head of the audition panel for the scholarship program. Darius had never spoken to Professor Whitmore directly. He'd seen him in the hallways, of course, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits, always carrying an air of authority that made students straighten their posture when he passed. He'd heard him teach, his voice drifting through the practice room doors as Darius mopped the floors outside, precise, exacting, accepting nothing less than perfection from his students. What Darius didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Professor Whitmore had very strong opinions about the scholarship program. In the faculty meeting where the scholarship had been proposed, Whitmore had been the lone voice of opposition. The idea had come from the Academy's new dean, Dr. Sandra Morrison, a woman in her 40s, who'd been brought in specifically to modernize the institution and make it more accessible to diverse talents. "We need to open our doors," Dean Morrison had argued passionately. "Classical music is dying because we keep it locked in an ivory tower. There are gifted musicians out there who never get the chance simply because they weren't born into the right circumstances. This scholarship is a statement that talent matters more than pedigree." Professor Whitmore had listened with barely concealed irritation. When it was his turn to speak, his words had been measured but firm. "I appreciate the sentiment, Sandra. Truly I do. But this academy has built its reputation on excellence. Our students come from the finest preparatory programs in the country. They've been trained by master teachers. They understand the discipline and rigor required for classical performance. To simply open the doors to anyone with no formal training required," he'd made air quotes with his fingers, "is to dilute the very standards that make this program prestigious. Are you suggesting that someone without formal training can't be excellent?" Dean Morrison had challenged. "I'm suggesting that excellence requires structure guidance and years of proper technical foundation. Natural talent is wonderful, but it's not enough. You can't shortcut the process. And frankly, I find it almost condescending to offer false hope to people who haven't put in the work." The debate had continued for another hour, but in the end, Dean Morrison had the board's support. The scholarship would be offered. The auditions would be open, and Professor Whitmore would chair the panel because there was no one more qualified to judge piano performance. He'd accepted the responsibility with professional grace, but privately, he believed the entire exercise was a waste of time. In his 30 years of teaching, he'd seen countless students with natural talent who'd flamed out because they lacked the discipline and foundation that formal training provided. He'd seen wealthy amateurs who believed their enthusiasm made up for technical deficiency. He'd grown weary of the modern sentiment that passion alone was enough. When he'd received the list of audition candidates, he'd reviewed each application carefully. Most were exactly what he'd expected: current or former students from reputable programs, young people in their late teens or early 20s, with impressive credentials and recommendations from respected teachers. Then he'd come to Darius Williams's application. Occupation: Custodial Services, Riverside Arts Academy. Education: high school diploma. Formal training: self-taught. References: Eleanor Hayes, Music Theory Department. Whitmore had felt a flash of irritation when he'd seen Eleanor's name. She was a fine theory teacher, but she'd always been too sentimental, too willing to see potential in students who lacked the killer instinct required for professional music. And now she was apparently championing the Academy's janitor. He'd made a note beside Darius's name, likely charity case. Low expectations. When audition day arrived, Professor Whitmore had come prepared to be thorough, but skeptical. He'd review every candidate fairly, of course. That was his professional duty. But he'd also make sure that the standards remained high, that this scholarship went to someone truly deserving, someone with the training and background to actually make use of the opportunity. He had no idea that his assumptions were about to be shattered in the most spectacular way possible. And he certainly didn't know that his decision to test one particular candidate would expose biases he didn't even realize he carried. May 15th dawned gray and humid, the kind of day that pressed down on you like a weighted blanket. Darius had barely slept the night before, his mind cycling through scales and arpeggios, running through mental rehearsals of his audition pieces until the notes blurred together in an anxious symphony. He'd arrived at the Academy 3 hours before his scheduled audition time. Not for work. He'd requested the day off, a rarity that his supervisor had granted with minimal questions, but because he couldn't stay home, couldn't sit still in his small apartment with nothing but his thoughts for company. Instead, he'd walked the familiar hallways as an outsider for the first time. Without his gray uniform and cleaning cart, without the invisible shield of his occupation, he felt exposed. The building that he'd known intimately for 7 years suddenly felt foreign. The sounds were different when you weren't mopping floors, voices echoed differently. Footsteps carried more weight, even the air seemed to vibrate with a tension he'd never noticed before. The auditions were being held in the main auditorium, a beautiful space with mahogany walls, tiered seating for 300, and a stage that had hosted countless student recitals, faculty performances, and visiting artists. Darius had cleaned this room hundreds of times, always, after events, always when it was empty and silent. He'd never imagined he'd be walking onto that stage as a performer. The waiting area was a large rehearsal room adjacent to the auditorium. When Darius entered, he counted 8 other candidates, all of them younger than him by at least a decade. They sat in various poses of nervous energy, some practicing fingering patterns on their laps, others pacing a few, listening to music through earbuds, while others sat in meditation-like stillness. The moment Darius walked in, conversations paused. Eyes tracked him as he found a seat in the corner. He could feel their assessment, their confusion. He didn't fit. His clothes, the new shirt and slacks Eleanor had bought him, were nice, but clearly off the rack. Nothing like the designer labels and tailored fits that adorned the other candidates. His hands, calloused and marked by years of manual labor, didn't look like the carefully maintained hands of trained pianists. His entire presence screamed other. A young woman sitting near him, maybe 22, with the kind of effortless elegance that came from a lifetime of privilege, leaned over with a polite smile. "First time auditioning here?" Darius nodded. "Yes. Where are you coming from, conservatory or university program?" "Neither. I'm self-taught." Her smile flickered confusion, replacing politeness. "Oh, that's interesting. So you're applying for the scholarship?" "Yes." "Well, good luck." She turned back to her phone, the conversation clearly over. Darius settled into his seat, trying to ignore the whispers that had started in the wake of that brief exchange. He'd expected this, had prepared himself for it, but knowing something intellectually and experiencing it emotionally were two very different things. An hour passed, then another. Candidates were called in one by one, their names announced by a student assistant who appeared at the door every 30 minutes or so. Each time someone left for their audition, the tension in the room ratcheted up. Those who returned had various expressions. Some elated, others devastated, most somewhere in between. None of them talked about the experience. That was the unspoken rule. At 2:15, Eleanor Hayes appeared in the doorway. She caught Darius's eye and gave him a subtle thumbs up and an encouraging smile. Her presence, even for just those few seconds, steadied his nerves. She believed in him. That had to count for something. At 2:28, the student assistant returned. Darius Williams. This was it. Darius stood his legs, feeling distant and strange, like they belonged to someone else. He followed the assistant through the corridor, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. She opened the door to the auditorium, gestured for him to enter, and then disappeared. The auditorium was darker than he'd expected, the house lights dimmed so that the stage was illuminated in a pool of warm light, while the seating area receded into shadow. He could make out figures in the first few rows, the panel of judges, but their faces were obscured. On stage, centered in that pool of light, sat a beautiful Steinway Model D concert grand piano. The same piano he'd heard countless students play over the years. The same piano that had seemed so distant from his own musical life. Mr. Williams. The voice came from the shadows, refined and commanding. "Professor Whitmore, please take the stage. You may begin when ready." Darius walked up the side steps, his new shoes quiet on the wooden stage floor. As he approached the piano, he could feel eyes on him from the darkness. He could imagine their thoughts. Who is this? Where did he come from? What is the janitor doing on our stage? He sat down on the bench, adjusting it slightly forward. His hands found their familiar resting position on his thighs. He took a breath deep and slow, trying to calm the hummingbird flutter of his heart. And that's when he noticed it. Before beginning his prepared pieces, Darius did what any trained pianist would do. He played a quick scale to warm up his fingers and acclimate to the instrument. It was habit muscle memory, something he'd done countless times in the basement on the old Steinway. His fingers descended in a simple C major scale. The notes that emerged from the piano were wrong. Not dramatically, catastrophically wrong, but wrong enough. The C sharp was flat by nearly a quarter tone. The F natural was sharp by a similar amount. The A was off-center, producing a sound that wavered between true pitch and something slightly sour. Darius froze his hands, hovering above the keys. For a moment he thought he'd imagined it, that nerves had somehow distorted his perception. He played the scale again, more slowly, this time, listening intently. No, the piano was definitely out of tune, and not randomly the specific keys that were off created maximum difficulty for the pieces he'd planned to play. The Bach required precise intonation for its fugue structure. The Chopin would sound muddy with these tuning issues. Even the Rachmaninoff, which he could play in his sleep, would be compromised. This wasn't accident. This was deliberate. Darius's mind raced. What should he do? Stop and point out the problem? That would be the logical choice. Any trained musician would immediately call for a piano tuner, would insist on a properly maintained instrument. It was his right as an audition candidate. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the memory of Professor Whitmore's voice in his head, the dismissive tone he'd overheard once when the professor had been talking about amateur pianists who make excuses. Maybe it was the awareness that he was already being judged not just on his playing, but on whether he belonged here at all. Maybe it was the deep-seated fear that if he complained, he'd be labeled difficult, ungrateful, someone who couldn't handle pressure. Or maybe it was something else entirely. A stubborn pride. A refusal to give anyone the satisfaction of watching him fail because of circumstances beyond his control. From his position at the piano, Darius could see a figure in the front row shift slightly. Professor Whitmore leaning forward, waiting, watching, testing. In that moment, Darius understood. This wasn't an accident or oversight. This was intentional. Someone and he had a very good idea who had sabotaged this piano specifically for his audition. They wanted to see if he would notice. They wanted to see if he would crumble. They expected him to make excuses or more likely to play poorly and prove their assumption that self-taught musicians lacked the real skill to perform under professional conditions. Darius Williams had spent his entire life being underestimated. He'd been the poor kid in the rec center, the factory worker's son, the janitor in the gray uniform. He'd been invisible, dismissed, overlooked in 1,000 different ways, large and small. But he had one advantage that Professor Whitmore couldn't have anticipated: perfect pitch. It was a rare gift possessed by less than 1% of the population. The ability to identify or produce any musical note without a reference tone. Darius had discovered he had it as a child, when he'd realized he could hear a song once and reproduce it exactly on the piano. Mrs. Brennan had tested him, confirmed it told him it was both a blessing and a challenge. "It means you'll always hear when something is wrong," she'd said. "But it also means you can learn to adjust. Your brain knows what the notes should be." For 7 years in that basement, Darius had dealt with an old piano that slowly fell out of tune. He couldn't afford a professional tuner, so he'd learned to adjust mentally to compensate with his fingers, to hear the true note in his head while producing the compromised version with his hands. It had been frustrating at first, then challenging, and eventually it had become second nature. He could do this. He would do this. Darius straightened his shoulders, placed his hands back on the keys, and made his decision. He wouldn't mention the tuning. He wouldn't give them the excuse to dismiss him. He would play these pieces perfectly, adjusting every note in real time, compensating for the sabotage with the precision of his perfect pitch and the skill he'd honed in thousands of hours of solitary practice. He would show them exactly what self-taught meant. "I'm ready," Darius said, his voice steady, carrying into the darkness where the judges sat. "Please proceed," Professor Whitmore replied. Was that a hint of anticipation in his voice? An expectation of failure? Darius closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. He heard Mrs. Brennan's voice. "You have something special?" He heard Eleanor's voice. "You have a gift." He heard his own voice, the one that had kept him going through 7 years of mopping floors and cleaning toilets while his real passion lived in secret. "You belong here just as much as anyone else." His fingers found the opening notes of Bach's Prelude and Fugue in C minor, and he began to play. The first notes of the Bach Prelude emerged from the piano with a clarity that seemed impossible given the instrument's condition. Darius's fingers moved with surgical precision, each keystroke calibrated to compensate for the tuning imperfections. When he reached a compromised key, his touch adjusted slightly harder, here, softer there, angling his finger to catch the sweet spot of the hammer strike. In the audience, Professor Whitmore frowned. Something wasn't right. The piano was definitely out of tune. He'd checked it himself an hour ago, personally adjusting those specific keys. He'd expected Darius to either notice and complain, or to play through it and produce a muddy, unprofessional sound that would justify his skepticism about untrained musicians. But this was neither of those things. The Bach continued, each voice of the fugue emerging with crystalline precision. The interweaving melodic lines that should have been muddled by the off-key notes were somehow perfectly clear. Whitmore leaned forward, his critical ear engaged now, in a way it hadn't been for the previous auditions. How was this possible? Beside him, Dr. Sandra Morrison, the dean who had championed the scholarship program, sat transfixed. She'd heard the Bach Prelude and Fugue performed hundreds of times by students at various skill levels. This performance was different. There was a raw emotional honesty to it, a directness that suggested the performer wasn't just executing notes, but genuinely communicating through them. Eleanor Hayes, sitting at the end of the panel, had tears streaming down her face. She'd known Darius was good. She'd heard him play many times in that basement room. But this performing under pressure on a sabotaged instrument in front of hostile judges, this revealed a depth of skill and character that even she hadn't fully appreciated. On stage, Darius was in a state of complete focus that bordered on transcendent. His conscious mind had receded, allowing the thousands of hours of practice to take over. His fingers knew where to go. His perfect pitch told him what to hear. His body understood the rhythm and flow of the piece as intimately as it understood breathing. But he was also doing something extraordinary, something that required immense concentration beneath the surface of his performance. For every single note, his brain was processing. This key is flat by X amount. Adjust finger angle by Y degrees. Strike with Z amount of force. Compensate. Adjust. Compensate. It was like playing two instruments simultaneously, the piano that existed and the piano that should exist. It was mentally exhausting in a way that normal performance wasn't. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. His shoulders tensed with the effort. But he didn't stop, didn't falter. The Bach reached its fugue section where four independent melodic lines intertwined in mathematical beauty, where the slightest imprecision would cause the whole structure to collapse like a house of cards. Darius played it flawlessly. The final chord resolved with a purity that seemed to hang in the air, defying the acoustic reality of the out-of-tune piano. Darius held the sustain pedal down, letting the sound decay naturally, feeling the vibrations through the bench and into his body. Silence followed. Not the awkward silence of confusion, but the stunned silence of people who had just witnessed something they couldn't quite explain. Professor Whitmore's hands gripped the armrests of his seat. His mind was racing through possibilities. Had he misjudged the tuning? Had his adjustments somehow canceled each other out? But no, he'd checked twice. That piano was definitely compromised. "Second piece, please," he said, his voice tighter than before. Darius took a slow breath. The Bach had been technically demanding, but the Chopin Ballade No. 1 that he'd planned next would be even more challenging on this instrument. The piece was famous for its dramatic, dynamic range from whisper-soft passages to thunderous fortissimos. The tuning issues would be even more apparent in the quieter sections. He could switch to the Rachmaninoff, which was less delicate, more forgiving of imperfections. That would be the safer choice. But Darius Williams hadn't come here to play it safe. His hands positioned themselves for the opening of the Chopin. The piece began with a simple, almost innocent melody in the treble, like a question being posed to the universe. Under his fingers, despite the sabotaged keys, it sang with heartbreaking beauty. In the audience, one of the other panelists let out an audible gasp. The Chopin Ballade. Number 1 is a piece that tells a story without words. It begins with that innocent question, then builds through increasingly complex passages, through moments of turmoil and peace, through technical challenges that have humbled even professional pianists, until it reaches a coda of such virtuosic intensity that it leaves both performer and audience breathless. Darius poured 7 years of silent practice into this performance. Every night of playing alone in the basement, every moment of wondering if anyone would ever hear what he could do, every sacrifice and compromise and dream, deferred it all, channeled through his fingers into this piano, this moment, this chance. The first climax of the piece, arrived a cascade of notes that descended like a waterfall. Darius's right hand flew across the upper register, while his left hand anchored the bass line with thunderous power. The compromised keys should have made this section sound chaotic, discordant. Instead, through the alchemy of perfect pitch and absolute focus, it sounded exactly as Chopin had intended. Professor Whitmore was no longer sitting back in his seat. He was perched on the edge, his decades of professional experience warring with what his ears were telling him. This was impossible. You couldn't compensate for poor tuning at this tempo with this complexity. The human brain couldn't process adjustments that quickly. And yet, the Chopin moved into its second narrative section, a passage of such delicate beauty that it seemed to float in the air like morning mist. Here, Darius's touch became gossamer light, his fingers barely kissing the keys. He was playing a piano that didn't exist, the perfectly tuned instrument that lived only in his mind, that his perfect pitch allowed him to hear beneath the reality of the flawed one under his hands. Eleanor Hayes had stopped crying and started smiling, a fierce pride radiating from her face. She wanted to stand up, to shout, to tell everyone in that room, "Do you see? Do you understand what you're witnessing? The piece built toward its final section, the coda that separated amateur from professional, good from great." It was a technical gauntlet, rapid octaves in both hands, massive chord progressions, a tempo that pushed the limits of human dexterity, and all of it dependent on precise intonation to maintain clarity. Darius's body moved with the music, now swaying with the emotional peaks and valleys. His face showed the strain of his dual effort performing the piece and correcting the tuning simultaneously, but it also showed something else. Joy. Pure, undiluted joy. Because for these few minutes, he wasn't the janitor. He wasn't the self-taught musician without credentials. He was just a man and a piano, and music that needed to exist in the world. The final cascade began. Darius's hands became a blur of motion notes pouring out in a torrential rush toward the climactic final chords. The piano, despite everything, sang with a power and clarity that filled every corner of the auditorium. The last chord crashed down, massive and definitive. Darius held at his foot on the sustain pedal, letting it ring out until the very last vibration faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Dr. Sandra Morrison stood up and began to applaud. Within seconds, Eleanor Hayes joined her. Then another panelist. Then another. Professor Whitmore remained seated, his face a mask of shock, and something else. Something that looked almost like shame. On stage, Darius sat very still, his hands resting on the keys, hardly daring to believe what had just happened. His heart was pounding, adrenaline flooding his system. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. But he wasn't finished yet. Third piece. A voice called from the darkness. Not Whitmore this time, but Dean Morrison. Darius turned slightly toward the audience, found his voice. "Actually, before I play my third piece, I need to say something." The applause died down. The panelists who had stood slowly retook their seats. "This piano," Darius continued, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands, "is out of tune. The C sharp is flat by approximately a quarter tone. The F natural is sharp by a similar amount. The A is unstable." I noticed it immediately when I sat down. A rustle of surprise moved through the panel. Professor Whitmore's face went pale. I chose not to mention it because I wanted to prove something. Not to you necessarily, but to myself. That I belong here. That being self-taught doesn't mean being unprepared. That not having the right background doesn't mean not having the right skills. Darius stood up from the bench, turning to face the audience directly, now his silhouette backlit by the stage lights. I have perfect pitch, which is how I was able to compensate for the tuning issues in real time. Every note I played, I adjusted mentally and physically to produce the correct sound, despite the instrument's condition. It's a skill I developed over 7 years of practicing on an old, poorly maintained piano in the basement of this building. The same basement where I work as a janitor. The same building where I've spent the last 7 years being invisible. He paused, letting that sink in. I don't know if this tuning problem was an accident or a test, but either way, I want you to know I noticed. And I played anyway. Because that's what musicians do. We adapt. We overcome. We make beauty out of whatever instruments life gives us. The silence that followed was profound. Then, from the shadows of the auditorium, Professor Harrison Whitmore stood up. His face was illuminated now by the reflected stage lights, and the expression he wore was complex. Part embarrassment, part awe, part something that might have been the beginning of respect. "Mr. Williams," he said, his cultivated voice carrying across the space, "I owe you an apology and an explanation." Professor Harrison Whitmore walked slowly down the aisle toward the stage, his usual confident stride replaced by something more hesitant. When he reached the orchestra pit area, he stopped looking up at Darius, who remained standing at the piano. "I sabotaged that instrument," Whitmore said, his voice clear enough for everyone in the auditorium to hear. "It wasn't an accident. I personally adjusted those keys approximately 90 minutes ago specifically for your audition." A collective gasp rippled through the panel. Dean Morrison stood up again, her face flushed with anger. "Harrison, what are you—" He held up a hand, not looking away from Darius. "Please, Sandra, let me finish." He turned his attention fully to Darius. "When I saw your application, janitor, self-taught, no formal credentials, I made assumptions. I assumed you were unprepared. I assumed you lacked the technical foundation for serious classical performance. I assumed that your application was, well, that it was a mistake encouraged by well-meaning but misguided people." His eyes flickered briefly to Eleanor Hayes. "I wanted to prove that formal training matters, that structure matters, that you can't shortcut years of disciplined study with raw talent and enthusiasm. So I created a test that I thought would expose your limitations in a way that would be educational for everyone involved, especially for the administration pushing for these accessible programs." Whitmore's voice caught slightly. "I was wrong. Profoundly, inexcusably wrong." He gestured toward the piano. "What you just did is impossible. Or rather, it should be impossible. Compensating for poor tuning in real time at that tempo with that level of technical complexity that requires not just skill, but extraordinary musicality and mental processing. The kind of ability that can't be taught. The kind of ability that is either present or it isn't, regardless of formal training." Darius stood very still, processing this confession. Part of him wanted to be angry, and he was somewhere beneath the shock. But a larger part felt something else: vindication, yes, but also a strange kind of pity for this man who had let his assumptions blind him to possibility. "But that's not even the most important thing," Whitmore continued. "The most important thing is this: you knew the piano was wrong. You knew it was sabotaged, or at least compromised. And instead of stopping, instead of demanding a fair instrument, which would have been your absolute right, you chose to prove yourself anyway. That takes not just skill, but character. The kind of character that no amount of prestigious education can instill." He took a breath, his shoulders sagging slightly. "I have been teaching for 30 years. I have trained students who went on to major careers. I thought I understood what makes a great musician. You have shown me in the span of 20 minutes that I still have much to learn." Whitmore turned to address the entire panel. "My vote, unequivocally, is that Mr. Williams receives the scholarship, not as charity, not as a feel-good diversity initiative, but because he is the most talented pianist to audition for this program. Full stop. He looked back at Darius. I cannot undo what I did. I can only apologize and promise to do better. I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. Truly and deeply sorry. The auditorium erupted into chaos. Panelists were talking over each other, some clearly furious at Whitmore's actions, others debating the implications. Dean Morrison was on her feet, her face a mixture of vindication and anger. Eleanor Hayes was crying again, but this time they were tears of relief and joy. Darius finally moved, descending from the stage. He walked over to where Professor Whitmore stood and extended his hand. Whitmore looked at the offered hand with something like disbelief, then grasped it firmly. Thank you for your honesty, Darius said quietly, and I accept your apology. But I need you to understand something. This isn't just about me. This is about every person who has been dismissed because they didn't follow the traditional path. Every musician who couldn't afford conservatory. Every artist who learned their craft in basement rooms and community centers instead of prestigious academies. He tightened his grip on Whitmore's hand. I'm not special because I have perfect pitch or because I can play Chopin. I'm special because I refused to let circumstances define my worth. And there are thousands of people like me out there, people with gifts and passion who just need someone to give them a chance. To see them. Darius released the professor's hand. So yes, I'll accept that scholarship if it's offered. But more than that, I want you to remember this moment the next time you look at an application that doesn't fit your expectations. I want you to ask yourself, what assumptions am I making? What possibilities am I closing off? Dean Sandra Morrison called for a 15-minute recess. The panel needed to deliberate, though. In truth, the decision had essentially been made. The question wasn't whether Darius would receive the scholarship after that performance, and Whitmore's confession any other outcome would have been indefensible. The question was what else needed to happen. Darius was led to a small green room backstage, where Eleanor Hayes found him sitting on a worn couch, his head in his hands, the adrenaline of performance finally giving way to exhaustion. You did it, she said softly, sitting beside him. My God, Darius, you did it. Did what he asked. His voice muffled. Proved I can be a circus act. Proved I can dance for judges who want to see me fail. Eleanor put a hand on his shoulder. No. You proved that excellence doesn't require permission. You proved that talent and dedication matter more than pedigree. You changed minds today, Darius. Maybe even changed this institution. I shouldn't have had to, Darius said, lifting his head. His eyes were rimmed with red exhaustion and emotion, finally breaking through. I shouldn't have had to jump through hoops that nobody else had to jump through. I shouldn't have had to perform miracles just to be taken seriously. You're right, Eleanor agreed. You shouldn't have. What Harrison did was unconscionable. But what you did in response, choosing grace over anger, choosing to prove yourself rather than walk away, that's going to have ripple effects you can't even imagine yet. Before Darius could respond, there was a knock at the door. Dean Morrison entered, followed by two other panel members, but notably not Professor Whitmore. Mr. Williams Morrison said, her voice formal but warm. The panel has reached a unanimous decision. We would like to offer you the full scholarship to the Summer Intensive Piano Program. Additionally, we are offering you a teaching assistantship position for the upcoming academic year, which includes tuition coverage for any additional courses you might want to take, plus a living stipend that would allow you to transition away from janitorial work if that's your choice. Darius stood up, hardly believing what he was hearing. Yes, I accept. Thank you. Morrison smiled. We also want you to know that we are implementing immediate policy changes. No audition instruments will be tested or modified without the knowledge and consent of candidates. All applicants, regardless of background, will receive equal treatment and accommodation. And we are establishing a formal mentorship program to support students who enter the academy through non-traditional pathways. She paused. Professor Whitmore has voluntarily stepped down from his position as department head, though he will continue teaching. He specifically requested that part of his continued employment be contingent on serving as your mentor during the program if you're willing to accept him in that role. You are under no obligation to do so. Darius thought about this. The easy path would be to reject Whitmore, to punish him for his prejudice and sabotage. But Darius had learned long ago that easy paths rarely led to meaningful destinations. "I'll accept him as a mentor," Darius said. "On one condition." "Name it," Morrison replied. "That he agrees to mentor other non-traditional students, that he uses this experience to become an advocate instead of a gatekeeper." Morrison's smile widened. "I believe that can be arranged." The panel members left, promising to send formal paperwork within the week. Eleanor remained behind, and as soon as they were alone, she pulled Darius into a fierce hug. "I am so proud of you," she whispered. "Not just for your playing, but for who you are." Darius hugged her back, this woman who had been his only ally, his secret keeper, his champion when he had no one else. "Thank you," he said, "for believing in me when nobody else did, for seeing me." "Oh, Darius," Eleanor said, pulling back to look at him. "I didn't make anyone see you. You made yourself impossible to ignore." News of the audition spread through Riverside Arts Academy like wildfire. By the next morning, the story had taken on mythical proportions. The janitor who played a sabotaged piano perfectly, who confronted a prestigious professor who changed the academy's policies in a single afternoon. Students who had passed Darius in the hallways for years without a second glance suddenly wanted to talk to him, to hear him play, to understand how he'd learned. Faculty members who had never acknowledged his existence now greeted him by name. The transformation was dizzying and in some ways uncomfortable, but there were genuine connections too. 3 other staff members, a security guard, a cafeteria worker, and an administrative assistant approached Darius separately to share their own secret creative pursuits. A painter, a writer, a sculptor. People who had, like him, kept their passions hidden because they believed there was no place for them in an institution dedicated to the arts. "Maybe we could start something," the security guard, a man named Robert Chen, suggested. No relation to any previously mentioned Chen, just an American man with a common surname. A group for staff who are also artists. A way to support each other. Darius liked that idea. He liked it very much. Professor Whitmore, true to his word, began attending to his own education about privilege and access. He reached out to community music programs in underserved neighborhoods. He started offering free masterclasses at public libraries. And when he met with Darius for their first mentoring session, he came with humility instead of authority. "I thought I was teaching you," Whitmore said during that first meeting. "But I'm beginning to think you have as much to teach me." Their relationship would never be simple. There was too much history, too much hurt for that. But it became real, built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy. Whitmore taught Darius the technical refinements that formal training provided: proper ergonomics, injury prevention, interpretation techniques from the classical tradition. Darius taught Whitmore something equally valuable: that passion and dedication could forge skills that were in some ways superior to those learned in cushioned comfort. The summer program itself was transformative. Darius thrived in the structured learning environment, absorbing knowledge with the hunger of someone who had been denied it for too long. But he also contributed something unique: a perspective that challenged his classmates to think about why they played music, what they owed to communities beyond concert halls, how classical music could become more accessible without losing its rigor. By the end of the 8 weeks, Darius had performed in his first formal recital, had recorded his first professional demo, and had secured interest from several management agencies. But more importantly, he had found his voice not just musically, but in terms of his identity and purpose. 2 years later, Darius Williams stood in the basement of Riverside Arts Academy, but this time, he wasn't alone. 20 students, some from the academy, others from local high schools and community programs, sat in folding chairs facing the old Steinway that had been his secret sanctuary. The piano had been fully restored, now tuned to perfect pitch, its black lacquer gleaming. But it remained in the basement, no longer forgotten, but reclaimed as something different, the practice space for the Academy's new Community Access program, which Darius directed alongside his graduate studies. This piano taught me something important, Darius told his students, his hand resting on the instrument's case. It taught me that imperfect conditions don't prevent perfect effort. That when the world gives you an out-of-tune piano, you don't complain, you learn to adjust. You adapt. You overcome. He sat down at the bench, gesturing for one of his students, a 15-year-old girl from the public school across town, to join him. But it also taught me that nobody should have to struggle alone in the dark. That talent deserves to be nurtured, not hidden. That the door to places like this should be open to anyone with passion and dedication, not just those who can afford to walk through. The girl beside him played a simple piece, making mistakes, stumbling over passages, but pushing through with determination. When she finished, Darius and the other students applauded warmly. Perfect practice, Darius said, isn't about playing without mistakes. It's about learning from them. It's about showing up day after day, even when nobody is watching. Even when nobody believes in you. Especially then. Upstairs in the main auditorium, a very different scene was unfolding. Professor Harrison Whitmore stood at a podium addressing the Academy's board of directors and invited guests. He was presenting the results of the Community Access Program's first 2 years enrollment numbers, retention rates, scholarship placements, and performance outcomes that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. We are seeing exceptional talent emerge from communities we had previously overlooked, Whitmore said, his voice carrying conviction that would have been unthinkable 3 years earlier. Students who bring not just skill, but perspective, not just training, but hunger. They are challenging our best traditionally trained students to work harder, think deeper, and question assumptions. He clicked to the next slide, which showed Darius conducting a sectional rehearsal. And we have one person to thank for opening our eyes to this possibility. A janitor who refused to stay invisible. A self-taught pianist who proved that excellence needs opportunity, not permission. In the audience, Dean Morrison smiled. The transformation of Harrison Whitmore had been one of the unexpected benefits of that controversial audition. He had become the program's most vocal advocate, using his reputation and connections to secure funding, recruit students, and change minds among skeptical faculty. After the presentation, Whitmore descended from the stage and was approached by several board members with questions and congratulations. As he spoke with them, he noticed Darius enter the back of the auditorium, fresh from his basement teaching session. Whitmore excused himself and walked over. "How were the students today?" "Brilliant," Darius replied. "Still rough around the edges, but the passion is there. The potential is extraordinary. I'm organizing a fundraising concert next month," Whitmore said. "Major donors' media coverage the works. I was hoping you might be willing to perform. Show them what this program can produce." Darius considered this. 2 years ago, he would have jumped at any opportunity to perform to prove himself. But he'd learned something since then about the difference between proving your worth and knowing your worth. "I'll perform," he said, "but not alone. I want to share the stage with students from the program. I want donors to see not just where we've been, but where we're going." Whitmore nodded slowly. That's perfect. Yes, let's do that." As they discussed logistics, Eleanor Hayes joined them, her face radiant. "I just got word that the Steinway Foundation is donating 3 concert grants to the Community Access Program." 3. "Do you know what this means? It means more students in more spaces," Darius said, his mind already racing with possibilities. "It means we can expand to other communities, partner with more schools. It means you've started something that's bigger than any of us," Eleanor said, looking between Darius and Whitmore. "Something that's changing what this institution stands for." 5 years after that transformative audition, Darius Williams performed at Carnegie Hall. The concert was a benefit for music education programs in underserved communities, and the hall was packed with donors, musicians, students, and community members who had followed his journey from janitor to rising star in the classical music world. But before he played, Darius spoke to the audience about his story. He talked about the basement piano, about Mrs. Brennan at the rec center, about Eleanor Hayes's quiet faith, about Professor Whitmore's transformation from antagonist to ally. "I used to think my story was about overcoming obstacles," Darius said, his voice carrying to the furthest reaches of the hall. "About proving myself despite the odds. But I've come to understand that it's actually a story about visibility, about what becomes possible when we choose to see each other fully, when we challenge our assumptions about who deserves opportunity." He sat down at the piano, a perfectly tuned Steinway, the kind of instrument he'd once only dreamed of playing. "This is Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the same piece I played on a sabotaged piano 5 years ago. But tonight, I'm not playing it to prove anything. I'm playing it to celebrate what happens when talent meets opportunity, when doors open instead of close, when we choose belief over doubt." His fingers touched the keys, and the first notes drifted into the hall, beautiful and true. As he played, Darius thought about all the invisible people in the world, the janitors and cafeteria workers, the self-taught artists and closet musicians, the ones with gifts that no one had noticed yet. He played for them. For the boy he'd been at the rec center, for the man he'd become in the basement, but mostly he played for joy. Because after everything, all the struggle and doubt, all the obstacles and triumphs, he had learned the most important lesson of all. Music didn't need permission to exist. Talent didn't require validation to be real. And a person's worth wasn't defined by how others saw them, but by how they chose to see themselves. The final notes of the Chopin rang out, and Carnegie Hall erupted in applause. But in that moment, Darius was somewhere else. He was in a basement room with an old piano, young and afraid, but full of dreams. And he was telling that younger version of himself, "Keep playing. Someone will hear you. Someone will see you. And you will change the world."